Hello, my name is Donna Washington, and I want to welcome you to the Tryon Palace's Juneteenth celebration. It's a day where we tell stories and we laugh and we sing and we make barbecue and chicken and have collard greens and sweet potatoes, and we tell stories and laugh and spend the day celebrating freedom. The question is, why the 19th of June? Why is that the day? Well, I'm glad you asked. Juneteenth isn't just a celebration of African American freedom. It's part of the history of America. And to understand how we got to Juneteenth, it's important to understand where we started. The story of Juneteenth is a story of the founding of our country and how long it took for us to get to a point where we were free, all of us. But that wasn't the end of the story, of course. There's more to come. But we're only going to go to Juneteenth. And because Juneteenth is a celebration of the story of who we are, it makes sense to start with a story of remembering. Because more than anything, Juneteenth is about remembering. So our first story today comes from West Africa, and it is about the importance of remembering and telling the story. How many of you have ever been to a family reunion and you all sit around and everyone tells stories about uncle this and cousin this and when your grandfather was a little boy? How many of you have heard those stories? How many of you hear stories about people who've passed away in your family? People who are no longer with you go, oh yes, Mama Ray, I remember her. She used to love to dance. Whatever it is, you hear about people who are gone or people who are far away, and it brings them close to you. You may have heard stories about people you never met that were part of your family. That's important, remembering the people who've come before us. And so this story is called The Cowtail Switch, and it is about memory. There was once a great hunter named Ogalusa, and he had a whole bunch of children. And he was well respected and well liked in his village. And one day he got his leopard skin and his spear and he went out the door to hunt. He was a great hunter. And his family, well, they came together that night, and someone said, where is Ogalusa? Where's our father? But he had not come back yet, and they said, oh, I'm sure he went out hunting. And the next day they gathered, and they asked the question, where's Ogalusa? Where's our father? Oh, well, he hasn't come home yet. And the next day they gathered again, where is Ogalusa? This happened day after day. And then they would go into the village, and someone would say, oh, we have not seen Ogalusa. And one of the children would say, well, he went out, but we don't know where he is. This went on for a long time. Now, Ogalusa did not return. And the longer he was gone, the less people asked about him, even the villagers. He was just gone. It was accepted. Now, when he left, he had a very small child named Puri. Puri got older and older and older and older, and she didn't speak. She was quiet at the table watching. She was quiet in the village. She was quiet during the day, and finally, she did speak. Opened her mouth and spoke. Everyone was kind of worried that she wasn't speaking. But when she finally did, the first words out of her mouth were at a dinner. The family was sitting around, and she, of course, was not speaking. And when there was a lull in the conversation, she stuck her little head up and she said, where is Ogalusa? Where is my father? It was the first time anyone had asked that question in a long time. Everyone sort of looked at each other. It was surprising. They said, well, what do you mean? Where is he? Well, I don't know. We don't know where he is. Well, where is the last time anybody saw him? And they began to think about it. And one of the children said, oh, I know. I saw him take his spear and his leopard skin, and he went out to hunt. But we haven't seen him after that. And Puri said, then go find him. And so they did. They went outside, and the children looked at each other, and it had been a long time. Now, Ogalusa had a great magic in him. Of course, he was a great hunter, but he had passed that magic down. to his children. And they weren't all hunters, but some of them had some pretty impressive skills. One of them said, well, I have a confession to make. I have learned that I have a magic of my own, like Father. I can track. I can find the tracks of things. And maybe if I work hard, I can find the tracks of our Father. And they said, well, do that. And so he did, and he began, and he searched and searched, and he picked up the faintest of tracks. And they followed those tracks deep into the trees, and there out, deep into the trees, they found their father. He had encountered a big cat, and he had actually killed it. They could see the spear into the cat's remains, but in the killing of that cat, clearly the cat had also killed him. And they all sat down together. There was nothing but a jumble of bones. And one of the children said, you know, I have a magic. I can put these bones back together. I can put a skeleton back together. I don't know what good it will do, but that's what I have. And they said, well, do that then if you can. And so carefully, he rearranged the bones until there was an entire skeleton there. And then another one said, well, I have a magic too. I can put the sinews back on. The sinews, yeah, I can put the sinews all back together. Well, then do that. And so he did, bringing all the muscle and the tissue and the sinews back. Another child said, I can put the skin back on. They said, well, put it on then. And so they put the skin back on. And then another one said, well, I can make his blood flow. And they said, well, make his blood flow. And so he laid hands upon his father, and his blood began to flow, but he was still asleep. So the children held their hands together and closed their eyes and brought all the thoughts they could of their father to them, and thought all the thoughts they could about him walking around and being alive. And they used the magic of their thoughts and their love, and they brought their father back to life. Well, Ogalusa sat up. He was quite surprised, and they cheered for their father, and they hugged him, and they told him what happened. He laughed. My children, he said, you are wonderful. And he took his spear and he headed home. Well, everyone was so excited to see him, and because he had been brought back from the dead, it was necessary for him to make an offering. Well, he shaved his head, and he threw a huge party. But before he threw that party, he made a cow-tail switch. Now, cow-tail switches are beautiful works of art, and they are usually given to people who are very deserving, elders or people who've done an amazing, great thing. And he had this big party, and everyone in the village came, and of course he had slaughtered a cow to get the cow-tail switch. There was much to eat. Everyone was sitting and talking, and then Ogalusa emerged with his shaved head and his beautiful outfit and that gorgeous cow-tail switch. And everyone saw it, and you must know, everybody wanted it because they knew he would have to give it to someone. And one of the women stopped by and said, oh, Ogalusa, you remember when you were younger, and I used to let you steal cakes off my window. I think you should give me that cow-tail switch. Another woman said, oh, no, Ogalusa, I'm the oldest woman in the village. I think you should give it to me. I'm very wise. And then another man said, oh, no, Ogalusa, my father taught you how to hunt, and he's passed on, but you should give it to me in honor of my father. Why, everyone started arguing. Everyone decided that they should have the cow-tail switch. They were the most honorable. They were the eldest. They had done the most for the village. Surely they deserved it. Ogalusa just laughed and said, I will give this cow-tail switch to one of my children. And all the children crowded around, because usually a cow-tail switch for a child, that was amazing. But how, he said, shall I decide? And well, everyone had advice, and then he said, I know what I will do. I will give this cow-tail switch to the child who did the most to bring me here today. Well, all the children began to talk about what they'd done. I found your tracks. If I hadn't found your tracks, nobody would know where you are. Oh, I'm the one who put your bones together. If not for your bones, there would be nothing to put your sinews on. But the sinews are important, and the blood, the blood was so important. Everyone started arguing about what they did. And then people lined up behind each child and started arguing with them. It was cacophonous. It was loud and ridiculous. And finally, Ogalusa just waved his hand, and everyone was quiet. He said, the child who did the most to bring me here is my youngest. And he picked up Puri, and he handed her the cow-tail switch. He said, she remembered me. She remembered, and she asked. And she is the one who brought that story out, brought out all things. If she had not remembered me, I would not be here today. it is important that we remember the people we love, where we come from. Everything we have is built on what they have done. So let us call the ancestors to us and thank them for their gifts. And that is the story of the cowtail switch. So let us tell the story so it is not forgotten how Juneteenth came to be our Independence Day. So let us begin back in 1775, when we, as an American country, ended the Revolutionary War. We threw the British off of our soil. Black soldiers fought side by side with white soldiers against the British. And we won, right? And so in 1776, all of the colonies sent representatives because we were going to become states. And on July 4th, well actually July 2nd, 1776, the Continental Congress voted to declare our independence, to make it completely and utterly legal. And on July 4th, it was signed and ratified, and we became the United States of America. And then it became important to figure out the laws that we were going to have to govern us. And so representatives, the Congress, they showed up and they began to argue about the best way to set up our country. Now, there are all sorts of ways to make decisions. Some of the choices we make are easy, some are hard, some are right, some are wrong. And when you get them all mixed up, you can have decisions that are hard to do, but they're the right thing. Our lives are like that, they're right too, right? There are things that you should do and they're the right thing, but they're hard to do. Like apologizing. Apologizing can be so hard, especially if you're the wrong one, if you did the wrong thing. Oh! And then there are decisions that are easy and the right thing to do, right? It's easy to decide, oh, you know what? I'm going to share what I have with my brother because I have plenty and he needs some. That's easy when you have plenty, when you're sitting in the cat spot, right? In the cat seat. When you got everything, it's easy to do the right thing as long as it's not going to, be too hard for you. But it can be hard to do the right thing. And then sometimes it's easy to do the wrong thing, especially if doing the right thing, well, the right thing because it's going to cost you something. So when the Congress got together, the Continental Congress, to decide about the enslavement of African Americans, some people thought it was an easy decision. We fought for freedom. Why not free everyone? We're free from Britain. Let the African people who are here of African ancestry, let's let them be free too. Well, it was easier for them, right? I guess they didn't own any enslaved people. They didn't believe in it. They were fighting for freedom. And then there were the people who found it difficult. That was a hard decision. They owned African slaves, and that's who did most of the labor. And they had told themselves a story, and the story was this: oh, those black people, they're not as smart as white people. The black man isn't capable of taking care of himself. He isn't able, and they prefer to be enslaved. Their lives are easier that way. And for them, making the right choice of freeing the enslaved people was too hard. They weren't going to do it. And they convinced themselves it was right to keep their enslaved people. Now, when you're trying to put a country together, which was the big goal, it's a give and take. And so the people who thought it was the right decision to free the enslaved people, they gave in. They said, we'll deal with it later. And the people who had slaves said, fine, we have the enslaved people, we're good. And so slavery was written into our laws. It was the wrong thing, but that's what they did. Now, I keep saying enslaved instead of slaves because a slave is something you are, but enslaved, That's something somebody did to you. Someone chose for you without your consent. And the reason why I say enslaved is because the African Americans who were part of America at that time were not happy to be enslaved. They spent years, hundreds of them, running away, defying the people who thought of themselves as their masters, doing everything they could to find freedom. There are reasons why there were laws about slave catchers and returning slaves, because they kept leaving. They did not wish to be enslaved. It was not a thing they chose, and it was a thing they fought against for centuries. It's hundreds of years. This is one of the stories that was told in the time of enslavement to give people hope and to give them the idea, the understanding that nobody can hold you forever if you fight the entire time. It comes from a collection by Virginia Hamilton. Long ago in Africa, they say there was a people who could fly. They could walk upon the air just as easily as you walking up on a gate. Yes, sir, they surely could. Now, some of those people, they were taken. And they were taken to the slave pens on the coast of Africa, the Ivory Coast. And while they were there, they were all huddled together. And they were sad. And then those people, while they were taken out of those pens and shackled onto the ships and taken across the ocean, and they could not take their wings with them. You can't fly with iron on, you know, you can't. And so sad and so pressed were they in that ship, they forgot that they could fly. And on the other side, they were sold and taken to different places. And a whole bunch of them ended up on a plantation. And they were working together out in the hot sun. Now, Sarah was there that day, and she had a baby with her. And the baby was hungry. And she'd fed it that morning, but she knew she needed to feed it again. But if she stopped, the overseer would be mad. So she left the baby on her back and she started bouncing it, promising that as soon as she could, she would stop working and she would feed it. But the overseer came over and said, "Keep that thing quiet." And she just bowed her head and she kept rocking the baby, singing a little bit, but the baby would not stop crying. And the overseer came over and took his whip and lashed her legs. And Sarah went to her knees. But the baby did not stop crying. But luckily old Toby was there that day. Old Toby saw Sarah and he knew who she was. And so he came over to her with the bucket and dipped the gourd in to give her a drink. But as he did, he started whispering in her ear, reminding her of who she was. And as she drank that cool water, memory sparked and her eyes opened and she stood up. But she didn't stop standing. She went up and up and up and up and up and up into the sky. She took that baby and cuddled it in her arms, and it cooed and pressed against her, and she turned her eyes north to freedom. Well, at the end of the day, the overseer was bringing everyone in, and somebody was missing, and the baby was missing. Sarah, they had no idea where she'd gone. They asked questions, but nobody had an answer. The man who called himself their master was not pleased. Well, a few days later, they were working out in the field, and another man, oh my gosh, Isaac tripped and fell. Oh, and he hit the ground, and before the overseer could come over, old Toby was there going over, and he gave Isaac something to drink, and he whispered in Isaac's ear. And Isaac heard the words, "Remember who you are." And Isaac's eyes were opened, and he drank that water, and he too stood up, and he didn't stop standing. Up and up and up and up and up he went, and he turned his eyes northward to freedom. Well, at the end of the day, the overseer was bringing everyone in, and someone else was missing. Well, the man who called himself master was not pleased. He said, "You figure out how they're doing this. You figure this out." Well, They'd sent the slave catchers out, but they didn't catch nothing. How are you going to catch someone who can fly? Well, the next day, they had their eyes open, keeping an eye, but nothing was happening. So they picked a man at random and they went over and they beat him. Not a question of what he was doing, they just did. And when he finally went to his knees, they stepped back and pretended to go on about their business. But old Toby was there. And he went over and he offered that man water and began to whisper into his ear. And as he did, he said, "Remember who you are." And that man opened his eyes and he felt the strength returning. And he stood up and he came up off the ground. Well, the overseers were quite shocked at this, but what they were more concerned about was old Toby. And they ran at him and they said, "Catch him!" And they took their whips out. "He's taught them how to escape." They meant to bind old Toby, and they let loose the dogs. They meant to grab old Toby. But Toby, he didn't look strange at them. He didn't cower at them. He didn't beg for mercy. That stoop-shouldered old man stood straight up and dropped that bucket. And he pointed at them and said to you, "Don't you know who we are? We are the people who can fly." And he raised up his hands and he called to the people on that plantation who could hear him. He called to them, "Remember who you are." And all around him, people turned and they remembered, and they took up off the ground. And all the way into the sky, and old Toby, he was not a stoop-shouldered old man. He was glowing like he had some kind of fire in him. And he turned and pointed to the north. And as those people turned to go, he looked down and he could see that there were others down there. They were not people who could fly, but they were begging him with their eyes, "Take us with you." And Toby shook his head. He said, "I'm sorry." He said, "I cannot teach you to do this, but you have your own wings. The second you get a chance, you run." And Toby turned his eyes north and took those people north all the way to Canada, where they would be free. And I know there are some people might not think this is true, but it was told to my great-grandmother and my grandmother and my mother, who told it to me. And that is the story of the people could fly. Now, if you like that story, you can find it in a book written by Virginia Hamilton called The People Could Fly. The descendants of the Africans who had been brought here to America kept fighting for the right to be free. They kept fighting for it. They kept running to find it. They kept singing for it. They kept thinking about it. Some people think that we kept nothing from Africa, that the seeds of it are gone. They couldn't bloom here in America because of what happened to the Africans when they got here. But the truth is, the reality is, the stories from Africa, the culture was deep in our bones when we got here. You can't just wipe that out in a moment. It seeped into lots of things. It seeped into music, jazz and blues. And it seeped even into rock and roll. We were the first rock and rollers, African Americans, oh yeah. It seeped into churches. Before we got here, the call and the response, the amens, the whole jubilation of church did not exist in the Western world. That is ours. The music, the calling, the response, all of that. But our stories came too. And they were hidden. But they were hidden in a really wonderful place. They were hidden in a spider. His name is Anansi. And the story we tell of Anansi in West Africa is that Anansi has all of the stories. All of them. I'll tell you why. You see, at the beginning of time, Nyame, the sky god, had all the stories, and he wouldn't share them with anyone, and Anansi thought he should have them, because he's a trickster character. And he said to Nyame, I want the stories. And Nyame said, you want the stories. Anansi, you're very small. The price for the stories is high. So many have tried, and no one could pay the price. That's why I have the stories. Anansi said, well, maybe I could pay it. Nah, you cannot. I could try. No, you cannot. Please. Fine. You think you can do this fine. He said, you must bring me Onini, the snake. And you must bring me Mboro, the hornet. And you must bring me Osibo, the leopard. Bring me these things and I will give you my stories. Well, Anansi went back down to the earth. The first thing he did was he got a big stick and laid it right there by the river. And pretty soon, Onini, the snake, came by. It's very long. Anansi said, excuse me, Onini, can you help me for a second? Onini said, certainly, friend Anansi. Yes, you see, I've been having an argument with my wife. You see, I say that you are much longer than this stick, and she says that you're not. Can you do me a favor? Could you lay down beside it just so I can measure? That would solve the argument. Onini said, certainly. He was very flattered that Anansi thought he was really long, so he laid down by the stick. But Anansi looked here and looked there and said, yeah, you know what? You're all curly and swirly. I can't tell. Do you mind if I just tie you to the stick for a second so I can stretch you really long? And the snake said, certainly, Anansi. And Anansi spun a thick cord, tied that snake to the stick, took him right up to the sky god. And Nyame said, my hands have touched him. But there remains what still remains. I know. So Anansi went back down to earth, and the next thing he did was he found a big gourd. He hollowed it out, cut off the top, and then with the little cup for the gourd, he filled that full of water, and he went over to where Mboro was in the trees. And he sprinkled the water all over Mboro, and he said, oh, Mboro, it's raining. Your wings will get so wet. Come into my gourd where it'll be safe and dry. And Mboro, the hornet, said, thank you. And went right in the gourd. And as soon as he did, Anansi put the top on, carried him up to Nyame. Nyame let him out. Mboro was really angry. Nyame said, my hands have touched him. But there remains what remains. And so Anansi went back down to earth. And when he got here, well, he dug a big pit in the middle of the ground, and in the road, actually, and covered it over with leaves, and pretty soon, Osibo, the leopard, came by. Right in the hole. And Anansi went over and looked down. Ooh, Uncle Osibo, you look really angry. I am angry! Someone dug a big pit right in the middle of the road. Do you know who did this? No, I do not know. But I can help you get out. Then do that! Okay. There was a big springy tree right next to the pit. Anansi lowered the tree and he said, Uncle Osibo, stick your tail up. I'll tie it to the tree and I'll let you up very slowly. The leopard said, thank you. And he stuck his tail up. And Anansi tied a thick cord to his tail. But he did not let that leopard up slowly. He let go of that tree, sling, and slung Osibo all the way up to the sky god. Nyame grabbed him and said, very well, my hands have touched him. You have won the stories, Anansi. And so he gave the stories to Anansi. Anansi went back down to his tree. But the sky god, he decided he would trick Anansi. He got a thorn and stuck it right in the tree where Anansi was trying to pull the story back up, and that thorn popped the stories. And that bag went open, and stories went out into the world. They went into the water, the air, to the trees, and into people. And right now, one of them is coming out of my mouth. So you see, all stories belong to Anansi. But we just get to share them. And so our country was founded in the evil of slavery. And the people who were enslaved, well, they spent generations trying to get out of it. They spent generations running. They spent generations fighting. But it wasn't just the people who were enslaved who were affected by the taint of slavery. It is a thing that pulls on everyone. The people who are doing it, possibly deep in their souls, they know that what they're doing is wrong. But maybe they don't. Maybe it gives them a feeling of power. But then it means that they're treating human beings as less than human beings, which taints everything around them. And the people who know it's wrong are heartsick about what's going on. It produces so much darkness and so much anger. And our country, as in its youth and its infancy, starting in the taint of slavery, it just got worse and worse and worse until in April 1861, the country could no longer go on as it was. No longer go on with this pull of hatred back and forth until the point where it tore the country apart. And the states that used slave labor, that had enslaved our African ancestors, well, they decided they didn't need to talk to anyone else. They were going to just take their ball and go home. And they seceded from the Union. They left. And the North said, no, it doesn't work like that. What you're doing is wrong. You cannot tear our country apart. Not only are you coming back, we're going to come get you. We're going to abolish slavery everywhere, which is sort of one of the reasons they left in the first place. And then we had our Civil War, where you had brothers fighting brothers. You had men who had been friends, confronting men who weren't friends. And suddenly we became North and South to the point of where, we could barely understand each other. We just didn't belong together. Fight. And in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln, January 1st of 1863, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, when I was a kid at school, I had heard that that was the day that slavery ended. But that is not what happened. What most people don't realize is that the Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery. No, we needed an amendment to the Constitution to do that. What he did was he said to the South and the territories that had slavery, you cannot do that anymore. The slaves that you have, the people enslaved in your territories, they're free. I'm saying that right now. They're free. And the dirty little secret is that in the North, there were people who still had slaves. It wasn't illegal to have them. But they did. They still had enslaved people with them. But it did end the enslavement in the South and in the territories. And the battles kept being fought, and eventually the Civil War ended. It ended in 1865. 2 years after Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And there weren't enough soldiers from the Union Army, from the North, to enforce that. And they didn't. And there's all kinds of lore about why they didn't. But what cannot be questioned, the thing we know for certain, is what happened in 1865. You see, June 19th of 1865, a man named Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas. He got there and realized they were still practicing slavery. He gathered everyone together and he had a pronouncement to make. And it was this. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. And the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired laborer. The reports of what happened that day are varied, but most people that have given some kind of account of it say that the assemblage was stunned, absolutely stunned. African Americans who thought they would never see this day, just jubilation broke out. A whole bunch of them didn't even stay around to hear about this new employer-hired laborer thing. They went straight home, packed, and left. They didn't have any place to go, and they didn't want to stay there. They just, whoop, they were out. Some did make arrangements to be a hired hand where they were going to get money for what they were doing. And it said that after that, every year, that people who had left would come back. They'd make a pilgrimage back to Galveston, and they would celebrate. They would eat barbecue, because, Texas, beef. And they would sing, and they would tell stories, and they would remember. They would remember. Just like we started out with remembering. They would remember what they had been through. They would remember, even though right now it's hard, because there is no history of having equal rights with black people in the country. White America didn't know what to do with that, and black America didn't know what to do with it. They were still trying to work their way through it. There wasn't any guidance about it, and how it worked, and what you could and couldn't do. They were just making it up. And every year, they went back to Texas. And that celebration grew and grew and grew until in the 1980s, some states made it an official holiday. Juneteenth. Today, it's celebrated all over the world. It's celebrated as a festival of freedom, to remember that we could overcome the sin, the taint of slavery. And we eat barbecue. And apparently you're supposed to drink any kind of red soda. We used to like Big Red when I was a kid. I don't know that they make that anymore. Strawberry flavored soda. And collard greens and sweet potatoes. Oh, foods that we think of as soul food. And you tell stories. Oh, and tea cakes, which you can also do sugar cookies. But we tell stories. And the last story that I'm going to tell for you today is a story that comes out of the laughter and the boldness and the joy of African American folklore. And it deals with one of my favorite characters. Anansi traveled across the ocean with us, the enslaved Africans. And when they got to America, they weren't allowed to speak their languages, tell their stories, worship their religions. They wanted to keep Anansi. They turned him first in the Caribbean into a woman. Her name is Aunt Nancy. If you go to the Caribbean, you hear stories about Aunt Nancy, it's Anansi the spider. Here in America, in the American South, the enslaved Africans were not allowed to speak their languages or tell their stories or worship their religions, but they wanted to keep Anansi the spider. They turned him into a rabbit. He is the basis of Brer Rabbit. And Brer Rabbit jumped all over America, getting mixed up with the European tricksters and the Asian tricksters, and somewhere in the 40s, they all got turned into Bugs Bunny. The next time you see Bugs Bunny, you are in fact seeing a little piece of Africa. On the day of jubilation, Juneteenth, June the 19th, well, they told stories and sang songs and laughed. And I like to think that they probably told some Brer Rabbit stories. Because the thing people don't necessarily realize is that Brer Rabbit is the spirit of all African Americans. He's clever, he's cunning, and he gets into trouble. Sometimes he pushes things a little far, but no matter what happens, he always has to be free. He is a spirit of freedom and overcoming. And the other characters that you see, like Brer Bear and Brer Fox, why? They represented the enslavers. They were always big and they thought they were so powerful, but ultimately they were never as smart as Brer Rabbit, and they couldn't ever quite keep him. So, for my last story for you today, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite Brer Rabbit tales. It's called The Laughing Place. Because I bet on Juneteenth, boy, were they laughing. Now, Brer Rabbit was all trussed up. He was trussed up so tight, the only thing he could move was his eyeballs. And Brer Bear and Brer Fox was making rabbit stew. Now, if it was me and I was the only rabbit around and Brer Fox was making rabbit stew, I think I'd be scared. But Brer Rabbit didn't look scared. Brer Rabbit was laughing. Now, Brer Fox was cutting up carrots and turnips, and Brer Bear was looking at that rabbit. He said, "Why are you laughing?" And Brer Rabbit said, "Well, I can't help it. I'm thinking about my laughing place. And when I think about my laughing place, I gotta laugh." Brer Bear said, "What's a laughing place?" And Brer Rabbit said, "Well, it's the best place in the whole world. When you're there, you just gotta laugh." Well, Brer Bear got all tickled. He said, "I want to see a laughing place." And Brer Fox says, "No, you don't. You know how he is. He's all tricky and everything. You don't want to see no laughing place." "Yes, I do." "No, you don't." Yeah, I do." "No, you don't." Yeah, I do." "You don't." "That's all right," say Brer Rabbit. "I'll lead you to my laughing place. All you got to do is put a rope around my neck and I'll lead you right there. Yes, I will." Well, Brer Bear was so excited he couldn't help himself. He got himself a rope. He tied it around Brer Rabbit's neck, and Brer Rabbit went bouncing on down the way, laughing so hard he about near wet his pants. Brer Fox, well, he was upset with the whole thing. "I can't believe you doing this. You know how tricky he is. You know, I can't believe you doing this." Brer Bear, he didn't care no more. Brer Fox was saying he was just so excited about the laughing place. "I'm going to see a laughing place." Finally, they stopped in front of a big old bush. And Brer Rabbit said, "Hey, my laughing place is in there." And Brer Bear was so excited when he threw that rope down and opened up and stuck his head in there. And then he heard, zzz. Ooh. When he pulled his head out, perched on his nose was about the biggest hornet's nest any of them critters had ever seen. Brer Bear said, "There ain't nothing in there but bees." Well, Brer Fox said, "Don't you move none. I'm going to get it for you." And he picked up a big stick and he whacked that hornet's nest. And that thing broke open and hornets went straight up and came straight down and started singing those critters all over. And Brer Bear and Brer Fox go running off to Cotchapee Hill, batting, swatting at those hornets, trying to get away. And Brer Rabbit had rolled carefully over into the trees, into the grass, and put his feet underneath that rope and pulled it right off. And he was laughing fit to bust. He had tears rolling down his face. He was laughing so hard. And Brer Bear got to the top of Cotchapee Hill, and he turned around and called out, "Wait a minute! You said this was a laughing place, and I ain't laughing." And Brer Rabbit called back, "Nah. I said this was my laughing place, and I sure am laughing hard." A celebration of cleverness. Old Brer Rabbit. Juneteenth. We celebrate it because it's the day that the very last people who were officially enslaved in America found out that they weren't. And they went nuts with freedom, drunk on it and happy to be. And so we celebrate them, we remember them, we tell stories that come out of the tradition of African and African American storytellers. But Juneteenth, let's not think that it's just one day. It's about freedom, it's about rights. For generations, African Americans were not allowed to learn to read and write. It was forbidden. So you know what I say? You read as much as you can, and you write to your heart's content. And when you go into school, you study hard, you come out with your degree, and you do that, and you are celebrating Juneteenth. For generations, African Americans had no say in anything that happened in the country. So you know what I say? Every time you have the opportunity, you vote. Because every time you vote and make your voice known, you are celebrating Juneteenth. You are celebrating the right to go out and be part of this community. Every time you go to the park and pick out your picnic basket and eat out in public and do what you like and no one can say boo to you about it, you are celebrating Juneteenth. Every time you drive down the street, buy your own car, save and buy a house, every time you participate in anything that is part of just being alive and being in America, you are celebrating Juneteenth. If you join a protest, if you run for senator or governor or commissioner or dog catcher, you are celebrating Juneteenth. Juneteenth was the culmination of hundreds of years of dreams. It is our job every single day to live those dreams in bright living color, as big as we can. And when we do that, we are celebrating Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth! Let's go out and celebrate. I'm Donna Washington from Tryon Palace, and I wish you a happy Juneteenth.